Every story has a beginning that the people inside it do not recognize as a beginning. They recognize it later, much later, when the consequences have arrived and the shape of things has become clear. And they say, "Oh, it started there. That was the moment." For this story, the moment was a wager. It was made on a Tuesday evening in November in the card room of White's between three young men who had drunk enough to be stupid and not enough to be unconscious, which is the precise quantity of alcohol most responsible for the worst decisions in English history. The wager was this: that Lord Julian Ashford, Viscount Pembroke, could not induce a respectable family to give him a daughter in marriage within 6 weeks, given that his reputation was, at that particular moment, sufficiently colourful that most respectable families had been warned against him. Julian had looked at his friends across the card table. He had thought of the Hartwell family, who had 2 daughters, one beautiful and one not, one sought after and one overlooked, and whose father was in sufficient financial difficulty that the word Viscount attached to any proposal would likely override most other considerations. He had said, "I'll take that wager." He had not thought about what happened after. That was, he would come to understand, the essential problem. He had thought about the wager and the winning of it. He had not thought about Mira. The Hartwell sisters were nothing alike. This was the first thing anyone said about them, and they said it with the particular emphasis of a contrast that was meant to be noticed, as though the point of one sister was, in some fundamental way, to make the point of the other more obvious. Sophia Hartwell was 22, golden-haired, and possessed of the kind of beauty that operated as a social force in its own right, arranging rooms around itself and directing attention the way a lamp directs moths, not through any particular effort, simply by existing. She was also charming, accomplished, and entirely aware of both facts, which she wore with the easy confidence of someone who has never had reason to doubt their own value. Mira Hartwell was 24, dark-haired, and had been described as plain so many times since childhood that she had long since stopped flinching at the word. She was not plain in the way of being unpleasant to look at. She had good bones, and her father's intelligent eyes, and a mouth that, when she was amused, which was more often than people noticed, curved in a way that changed her face entirely. She was plain in the way that society used the word, which meant not immediately striking, not the first person a room looked at, not Sophia. She was also, and this was the thing that mattered most and that almost no one knew, the author of 3 widely circulated essays on moral philosophy, 2 satirical sketches of London society that had been passed hand to hand at dinner parties for 18 months, and a novel, unpublished but complete, that sat in the bottom drawer of her writing desk and waited. She wrote under the name M.H. Gray. No one in her family knew. No one in her acquaintance knew. She had kept it secret not from shame. She was not ashamed of it. She was proud of it, in the private, careful way of someone who has learned to keep their pride somewhere safe, but from pragmatism. She had observed, with the clear-eyed attention of a person who had spent her life in the periphery of rooms, that the world treated a woman's writing differently when it knew the woman. The essays had been taken seriously. The sketches had been widely admired. She had reason to believe this would change the moment anyone attached a female name to them. So she kept her name out of it. And she sat in the drawing room of Hartwell House and listened to her mother discuss Sophia's prospects. And she read, and she observed, and she wrote, and she waited for whatever came next. What came next was Julian Ashford. He arrived for tea on a Wednesday, which was unusual. Callers generally arrived at the more conventional morning call hour, and tea suggested either that he had been delayed or that he operated outside the normal conventions of social timing, which, she would discover, was entirely accurate. He was tall and dark-haired, and possessed of the kind of looks that her mother's friends described as rakish, which was the word society used for handsome men who had done things it preferred not to specify. He had an ease about him that was either genuine confidence or very well-performed carelessness. She had not yet determined which. He sat across the drawing room and talked to her mother and talked to Sophia and said, in Mira's direction, 2 sentences in 40 minutes. She noticed everything. She always noticed everything. She noticed the way he looked at the room, assessing, calibrating, the look of a man with an objective rather than a man paying a social call. She noticed the slightly too studied quality of his ease. She noticed that when Sophia said something charming, he smiled in the way of a man performing appreciation rather than feeling it. She noticed that when she said something, one of the 2 occasions he addressed her directly, he looked at her for slightly longer than the social requirement. Just a fraction. The kind of pause that means something registered that was not expected. She filed it away. She did not think about it further. She had no reason to think about it further. He came back the following Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. And on the 4th Wednesday, he arrived with her father in the library before tea, and came out 20 minutes later, and the thing was done. Her mother told her at dinner. Mira set down her fork. She looked at her mother's face, the particular complicated expression of a woman who had hoped for a different outcome, and was attempting to present the actual outcome as acceptable. "He asked for me," Mira said. Not a question, confirming. "He asked for you," her mother said. A silence. "Why?" Mira asked. Her mother looked momentarily thrown. "Why? Because he is a Viscount, Mira. He has an estate in—" "I know what he is," Mira said. "I am asking why he asked for me." Her mother had no answer that she was willing to give. Mira looked at her plate. She was not a foolish woman. She was, if anything, too clear-eyed for her own comfort. She knew what she looked like, and she knew what Sophia looked like, and she knew the mathematics of why a man who could have the beautiful sister had asked for the plain one. She knew it was not because she had been noticed. She said, "I will need to think about it." Her mother stared at her. "Mira, I will need to think about it," she said again, and excused herself from the table. She went to her room and sat at her writing desk and looked at the bottom drawer for a long time. Then she took out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. She wrote for 2 hours. Not the novel, something else, something sharper. An essay about the architecture of social expectations and the particular kind of transaction that dressed itself up as matrimony. She wrote it with the white-hot precision of a woman who is working something out by putting it into words. At the end of 2 hours, she read it back. It was, she thought, the best thing she had ever written. She folded it. She addressed it to the editor of the Quarterly Review that had published her previous essays. She sealed it. And then she went back to her mother and said, "I will accept." Not because she was foolish enough to believe this would be good, because she was clear-eyed enough to understand that it was necessary, and because somewhere underneath the clear-sightedness was the very human hope that she might be wrong about why. She was not wrong about why. She found out the truth 6 weeks later. She found out the way most people find out the things that ruin them, by accident, in a moment not designed for revelation, with no time to prepare. They had been married for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of the careful, politely managed coexistence of 2 people who did not know each other and were navigating the architecture of a shared life with the tentative attention of people who have moved into unfamiliar territory. Julian was not unkind. She had prepared herself for unkindness and had been surprised by its absence. He was courteous, occasionally amusing, and had an intelligence that surfaced in their conversations at unexpected moments, and that she found, against her better intentions, interesting. He did not ignore her. He did not condescend. He simply kept a distance that she could feel but not quite measure, and she kept her own distance in return, and they orbited each other in the large, quiet rooms of Pembroke House like two planets in adjacent but non-intersecting paths. She wrote every morning. He had not asked what she wrote, and she had not told him. She had, in the 6 weeks of their marriage, submitted 2 more pieces to the Quarterly Review under the name M.H. Gray, and had begun the revisions on the novel that the editor had, to her extraordinary and carefully concealed delight, expressed interest in seeing. She was in the library, his library, now her library too, which was the best room in Pembroke House, and the one she had privately identified on first arrival as the place she was most likely to survive, looking for a specific volume on the upper shelf, when she heard the voices in the adjoining room. The door was not fully closed. She heard it because she was not meant to hear it. The conversation was between Julian and his friend Viscount Crail, who had come for dinner and was apparently early, and who had been shown to the sitting room while Julian dressed, and who spoke with the comfortable volume of a man who believed himself unobserved. She heard her name. She heard the words that followed it. She stood very still on the library ladder, with a book she was no longer looking for in her hands. And she listened, and she understood, completely and finally, what she had known in a vague, unacknowledged way since the beginning. The wager. The 6 weeks. The deliberate selection of the sister no one wanted, because the sister no one wanted would accept. She heard Julian's voice then, and this was the part she turned over and over in the months that followed, the part she could not entirely make sense of. He did not laugh. He did not confirm the joke with the relish of a man who had won cleverly. His voice, when he responded to Crail, had a flatness to it, a brevity, that was not the voice of a man enjoying a victory, but it was also not the voice of a man denying it. He did not deny it. She climbed down the ladder. She put the book back on the shelf. She walked out of the library, through the connecting door, to her own sitting room, closed the door behind her, and sat down at her desk. She did not cry. She had learned very young that crying was a relief she often could not afford, and she had become skilled at processing difficult things in other ways. She took out a sheet of paper. She wrote 1 sentence at the top. A woman who knows the price she was sold for is not the same woman who did not know. She looked at it for a long time. Then she wrote the next sentence, and the next. And by the time Julian knocked on her sitting room door to tell her that dinner was ready, she had the outline of something she had not previously had. Not just an essay or a sketch or a novel, but a purpose. She opened the door. He looked at her face. Something moved in his, a flicker of concern, or of something that might have been concern if she had been in the mood to be charitable about it. "Are you well?" he said. "Perfectly," she said. "Shall we go in?" She walked past him into the corridor, and she decided, walking to dinner in the house that was now hers, whether she had been wanted in it or not, that she was going to be absolutely fine. She was going to be considerably more than fine. She was simply going to stop doing it quietly. The novel was published in March. The editor, a man named Mr. Thomas Alcott, who had been in the business of literary periodicals for 30 years, and who had, in that time, developed an extremely accurate instinct for the things that people would not be able to stop talking about, had read the manuscript in 2 sittings, and written to M.H. Gray with a directness that matched hers. This is exceptional, and I want to publish it immediately, and I would like to know who you are. She had written back, "You may publish it. You may not know who I am. Not yet." He had published it. The novel was called The Education of a Gentleman, and it was, on its surface, a comedy of manners, the story of a young man of good family and poor character, who navigates the social season with the confidence of someone who has never been held accountable for anything, and discovers by degrees and in the most public possible ways that accountability has been waiting for him all along. It was funny, genuinely, precisely funny, with the particular quality of humour that comes from accurate observation rather than invention. It was also, underneath the comedy, something more serious, a study of the gap between what society rewarded and what it should have rewarded, delivered with the scalpel precision of someone who had been watching from the margins for years. London read it in April. By May, it was in its 3rd printing. By June, the question of who M.H. Gray was had become the most discussed mystery in London drawing rooms, with theories ranging from the plausible to the entirely eccentric. The leading candidates, according to the various factions who had formed around the question, were a retired diplomat, a disgraced clergyman, a woman of middle years with a grudge against the aristocracy, and, among a smaller but increasingly vocal group, a young woman of considerable intelligence who had found the perfect cover in anonymity. The Quarterly Review published a profile of M.H. Gray's work, 3 years of essays and sketches assembled for the first time in one place, that described the author as possibly the sharpest social observer writing in England at present, and noted that if the author were indeed, as some suspected, a woman, it would explain both the precision of the observation and the necessity of the anonymity. Mira read this profile in her sitting room at Pembroke House and felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. Not by anyone who knew it was her, but seen nonetheless. The work seen, the mind behind it recognized. The thing she had been doing in private acknowledged as the thing she had known it was. She also, in the sitting room of Pembroke House, heard Julian reading the same profile in the library next door, and heard him say, quietly to himself, not knowing she could hear through the thin wall, something she could not quite make out. Just 2 words. She thought, though she could not be certain, that they were, "of course." She did not know what to do with that. She filed it away. She kept writing. In her first season as Lady Pembroke, Mira had been invisible. This was not new. She had been invisible in every room she had entered since approximately the age of 14, when Sophia had arrived in the same rooms and rearranged the available attention. She had been present, politely managed, and otherwise unremarked. She had attended the balls and the dinners and the morning calls, and had said the appropriate things and been noticed by no one in particular. In her second season, something had changed. She had not changed, not in the ways that society usually meant by the word. She had not acquired new gowns, or a different manner, or a more strategic approach to the architecture of social performance. She was the same person she had always been, but the same person had spent a year watching and writing and sharpening, and had developed, without quite planning to, the particular quality of someone who knows exactly who they are and has stopped apologizing for it. It was a quality that, she discovered, rooms responded to. It started at the Carrington dinner in February, when she found herself next to Lord Aldwych, who was a man of 40 and considerable influence in literary circles, and who mentioned M.H. Gray's novel with the enthusiasm of someone recommending it. She had said something about it. He had looked at her. He had said something back. And the conversation that followed was the best she had had at a dinner table in 2 years. And when it was over, Lord Aldwych had said to his wife, who later told 3 people, that Lady Pembroke was one of the most interesting women he had ever spoken to, and he could not think why he had not noticed her before. Because, Mira could have told him, you were not looking. But things, once they begin, tend to continue. By March, she had been asked twice to contribute to a literary salon hosted by Lady Devonish, one of the great intellectual gathering points of the season, in a capacity that had nothing to do with her husband's title and everything to do with what she actually was. She had attended. She had contributed. Lady Devonish had said, afterward, that she hoped she would come every week. She came every week. By April, the salon was more attended than it had been in 3 years, and several people had noted, with the slightly puzzled quality of those encountering something they had not predicted, that Lady Pembroke was, well, extraordinary once you actually talked to her. By May, she had been drawn, against all social precedent, into the inner circle of 3 of the most formidable women in London. Not through connections or family or the social capital of beauty, but through the sheer force of being genuinely compelling to be around. The Viscount Pembroke, who had been watching all of this with the complicated expression of a man who has made a bed and is discovering what it is like to lie in it, said nothing. He was at most of the same events. He watched her across rooms with the same careful, slightly too long quality of attention she had first noticed at Hartwell House. And she watched him watch her, and neither of them said anything about it. They were, in the rooms of Pembroke House, still orbiting. Still the careful, politely managed coexistence of 6 weeks that had never quite resolved into anything else. But the orbit, she noticed, had changed its quality. He watched her differently now. She was not certain yet what that meant. She was not certain. She was ready to find out. The unmasking was not her choice. She had intended to remain M.H. Gray indefinitely. She had been managing it with the careful precision of someone maintaining a productive fiction. Mr. Alcott knew, and 2 people at the publishing house, and that was all. And she had trusted all of them, and they had kept it. What she had not accounted for was Lord Aldwych. Lord Aldwych, who was a good man and a genuine admirer of the work, had been in conversation with Mr. Alcott at a literary dinner in June, and had said, in the course of a conversation about M.H. Gray's extraordinary novel, that he suspected the author was a woman, and that, moreover, he thought he might have met her. He did not name Mira. He did not intend to name Mira. He simply said that there was a quality of observation in the work that reminded him strongly of a particular kind of intelligence he had encountered only rarely, and that the last person to demonstrate it had been Lady Pembroke at the Carrington dinner in February. Mr. Alcott had said nothing. His expression had said something. Lord Aldwych, who was perceptive, had read it. He came to call the following Tuesday. She received him in her sitting room, not the drawing room, which was for social calls, but the sitting room, which was where she worked, and which had the manuscript pages of her second novel on the desk in plain sight, because she had not expected a caller. Lord Aldwych looked at the desk. He looked at her. She looked back at him. "Lady Pembroke," he said, with the tone of a man arriving at a destination he had been travelling toward for several months. "Lord Aldwych," she said. A pause. "I should like," he said carefully, to host a reading at my house, the work of M.H. Gray, presented to the 40 most significant literary figures in London. He held her gaze. I would like to invite the author to be present, in whatever capacity she, or he, found appropriate. Mira looked at him for a long time. She thought about the bottom drawer of the writing desk, where the first draft had waited for 2 years. She thought about the profile in the quarterly review, the mind behind it recognized. She thought about Lady Devonish's salon and Lord Aldwych at the Carrington dinner, and the 3 formidable women who had drawn her into their circle on the basis of who she actually was. She thought about a year of being seen, partially, incompletely, through the veil of a name that was not quite hers. I will come, she said, as myself. The reading was on the 15th of June. Lord Aldwych had been discreet in the invitations. He had said only that the author of the Gray essays and the novel would be present, and had not specified who that was, and had relied on the 40 people in the room being intelligent enough to understand that they were being offered something worth attending. They were intelligent enough. The room was very quiet when Lord Aldwych made the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I have the extraordinary honour of presenting to you the author of The Education of a Gentleman, of 3 years of essays that have been quoted at every dinner table in London, and of the most incisive social observation in English letters since Lady Mira Pembroke, known to you until this evening as M.H. Gray. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then the room erupted. Mira stood at the front of Lord Aldwych's magnificent drawing room, in the ivory dress she had worn because it was the one she felt most like herself in, and looked at 40 of the most significant literary minds in London discovering who she was, and felt something she had no name for. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter and more complete than either. Something like, there, that is done. Now we go forward. She looked across the room and found, without having looked for him, the face of Julian Ashford. He had not been on the invitation list. He was here because Lord Aldwych was his cousin and had mentioned the reading, and because Julian, in the past 6 months, had attended every event where there was a possibility of seeing his wife in a room. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him. Not the studied ease, not the careful distance. Something entirely different. Something raw and unguarded and complicated. The expression of a man encountering the full scale of what he had underestimated and finding the scale considerably larger than he had imagined. She held his gaze for 1 moment. Then she turned to the room, and she began to read. She knew he was looking at her. She had always known. The carriage ride home was the longest of her life. They rode in silence, not the comfortable silence of their occasional good evenings, not the managed silence of their usual ones, but the silence of 2 people who have arrived at a place where the previous arrangements no longer apply, and neither has spoken the words that make the new arrangements possible. She looked out the window. He looked at her. When he was looking at her, had developed in the year of their marriage an involuntary awareness of him that she had catalogued among the inconveniences she had not anticipated. Mira, he said. Not tonight, she said, without turning. A pause. All right, he said. They reached Pembroke House. She went to her sitting room. She sat at her desk and looked at the manuscript pages and did not touch them. She thought about his face in Lord Aldwych's drawing room, the unguarded thing she had seen on it. She thought about the 2 words she had thought she heard through the wall 3 months ago when he read the profile. Of course. She thought about a year of watching him watch her, the orbit that had changed its quality. She thought about the wager. She picked up her pen. She wrote, "The thing about a person who hides behind cruelty is that eventually the hiding becomes its own kind of suffering. This is not forgiveness, it is simply observation." She looked at the sentence for a long time. Then she put down the pen. She went to bed. She did not sleep for some time. He knocked on her sitting room door the following morning at 8 o'clock, which was early for him. He was not yet dressed for the day, in shirt sleeves, which meant he had come directly, without the armor of formality. She opened the door. He looked at her. He said, "I know I do not deserve to say what I want to say. I want you to know that I know that." "Say it anyway," she said. He said it. He told her about the wager, all of it, the card room, the logic of it, the selection of her specifically, because she would accept what others wouldn't. He told it plainly, without self-exculpation, with the direct, unsparing quality of a man who has decided that the only remaining currency he has is honesty. He told her the rest of it too. He told her about the Wednesday calls at Hartwell House, and the way she had said something in the first conversation that had caught him off guard. Something intelligent and slightly sharp, delivered without performance, and the way it had lodged in him. He told her about the 6 weeks before the wedding, which he had begun as a transaction and had ended with the uncomfortable recognition that the woman he was proposing to was more interesting than anyone he had met in years, and that he was doing her a significant wrong, and that he had been too proud and too committed to the terms of his own wager to stop it. He told her about the wedding and the first months of marriage, and the growing clarity of what he had done and what it had cost her and what it had cost him. The latter being, he acknowledged, considerably less important than the former, but real. He told her about the essay she had sent to the Quarterly Review in the first week of their marriage. He had found it in the published edition and had read it, and had understood with the full weight of comprehension that what she had written was true, and that she had known why she married him from the beginning. "You knew," he said. "You knew before the wedding." "I suspected," she said. "And you accepted anyway." "I had reasons." "Tell me." She looked at him steadily. "Because I needed to leave my father's house. Because a Viscount's house, even on bad terms, was better than the alternative. Because," she paused, "I thought I might be wrong. I thought there was a possibility I was misreading it. I wanted to be wrong." He absorbed this. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple, and he meant them with his entire self, which she could hear, and which made them harder to dismiss than an elaborate apology would have been. "I know that it doesn't fix it," she said. "No. It doesn't change what it was. No. But," she stopped. He waited. "But," she said finally, "I have been watching you for a year, and you have been watching me, and I am trying to determine whether what I have seen is the person underneath the wager, or whether it is still the wager." "It is the person," he said. "I know I have no way to prove that to you, that you are obliged to accept." "No," she agreed. "You don't." A pause. "What would it take?" he said. She looked at him, at the shirt sleeves and the early morning and the unguarded face, at the man who had sat on the other side of a library wall and said, "Of course." "Time," she said. Honesty. No more distance. Yes, he said. And she paused. You have to read the second novel. Something shifted in his face. The beginning of something. You're writing a second one. I have been for 4 months. Is it... He stopped. Is it about us? She looked at him with the particular quality of M.H. Gray encountering excellent material. Parts of it, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, quietly, with the tone of a man who has understood that he will spend the rest of his life being observed by the sharpest eye in London, and has decided this is not the worst fate. Is my character sympathetic? He becomes sympathetic, she said, eventually. He breathed. Good, he said. I'll take eventually. Viscount Crail came to call in July. He arrived at Pembroke House with the slightly too comfortable ease of a man who had known Julian since school and expected the familiar rhythms of a particular kind of friendship. The friendship that had produced the wager, that existed in the card rooms and the club and the world of men who did not think carefully about consequences. He was shown to the drawing room. He found both of them there. This was, she understood, what he had not expected. The particular quality of his expression when he saw Mira seated at the writing desk by the window, not in a chair arranged for receiving, but at her desk, working, in the clear possession of the room, told her that he had anticipated Julian alone, or Julian and a suitably decorative wife arranged at the appropriate social distance. He had not anticipated the woman who had read her own work to 40 people at Lord Aldwick's house 3 weeks ago, whose name was now in 4 periodicals, and who had been described in the Literary Chronicle that morning as the most significant new voice in English letters. He sat. He made the social overtures. Julian responded with the pleasant, slightly cooler quality he had developed in the past month, the quality of a man in the process of reconsidering his associations. Mira did not look up from her desk immediately. When she did, she set down her pen with the deliberate quality of someone choosing to give their attention, and looked at Viscount Crail and said, Lord Crail, I believe you and my husband made a wager last November. The room went very still. Crail looked at Julian. Julian looked at Crail with the expression of a man who had made his choice and was comfortable with it. Crail started. You wagered, Mira said pleasantly, that my husband could not secure a respectable marriage within 6 weeks. He secured one in 4. She tilted her head. I understand he won a considerable sum. Crail's face had gone through several expressions. He settled on a version of dignity. Lady Pembroke, I assure you, I am not upset, she said, and she meant it. She had processed the wager over 8 months of writing and thinking, and she had arrived, finally, at the place where it was simply a fact. The fact that had started everything, rather than a wound that needed tending. I mention it only because I think you should know that I know, and that I have written about it. A pause. Not with names. The Education of a Gentleman is a novel, not a memoir. But the architecture of it, the specific quality of a man who uses a wager as a substitute for thought, is, I think, something readers have recognized. Crail was very still. The character, Julian said, from his chair by the fireplace, with the mild tone of a man who has been waiting for this moment and is finding it instructive, is not sympathetic. He becomes slightly sympathetic, Mira said, at the very end, when he reflects on what he has done and finds himself insufficient. She looked at Crail. You might find it interesting reading. Crail left shortly after. Julian looked at her across the drawing room. She picked up her pen. Well done, she said. I didn't do anything, he said. You stayed in the room, she said. That was everything. He was quiet for a moment. "Mira," he said. "Yes?" "I love you." Simple, direct, the way he had learned from her to say things that mattered. "I have loved you since approximately the 5th Wednesday at Hartwell House, when you said something about the Corn Laws that was so accurate and so deliberately timed that I nearly laughed out loud and caught myself. And I went home and thought, I have made a terrible mistake, and it was not marrying you." He paused. "The mistake was the wager, and the cowardice, and everything that came before I understood what you were." Mira set down her pen. She had known, she thought, had known for months, in the involuntary accounting of a woman who notices everything. Had been waiting for the words, not because she doubted them, but because she needed them said, out loud, in the air between them, where they could not be unsaid. "I know," she said. "Is that all you're going to say?" She looked at him across the drawing room, the room that was hers as much as his now, in the house that was hers, in the life she had built from the wreckage of a wager. "For now," she said, "I'm writing a chapter." He laughed. She smiled. And she wrote the chapter. The second novel was published in October. It was called The Architecture of Marriage, and it was, by common agreement among the people who read it in the first week and then pressed it urgently into the hands of everyone they knew, the best thing M.H. Gray had written. It was also, unlike the first novel, a love story. Not a simple one, not the love story that society usually meant, the story of a beautiful woman and a man who deserved her. It was the story of two people who had come together badly, for the wrong reasons, and who had found their way to something real through the specific, unglamorous work of honesty. The woman in it was not beautiful in the traditional sense. The man in it was not immediately deserving. The love story was built not from grand gestures, but from 8 months of small ones. The shirt sleeves and the early morning, and the, of course, heard through a wall, and the staying in a room. London, reading it, did not know what to do with how much they loved it. Lady Devonish said at her salon in November that The Architecture of Marriage was the only novel she had read in a decade that was about marriage as it actually was, rather than marriage as it was supposed to be, and that whoever M.H. Gray was, they had lived the thing they were writing about. Lord Aldwych, who knew, said nothing and smiled into his wine. The Quarterly Review published a piece calling M.H. Gray the defining voice of the age. 3 separate drawing rooms independently arrived at the conclusion that Lady Pembroke was the most interesting woman in London. It was not a conclusion based on beauty or birth or the management of a great house. It was not the kind of admiration that could be manufactured or angled for. It was the thing that happens when a mind of genuine quality is finally in a position where it can be seen, and the people doing the seeing are intelligent enough to recognize what they are looking at. Mira received it with the same equanimity with which she had received the preceding years of invisibility, with the clear-eyed, slightly ironic attention of a woman who had spent long enough in the periphery to know that the center was also temporary, and that neither location was the point. The point was the work. The point was always the work. Sophia, who had married a baronet in the spring and was settled in a house in Hampshire that was comfortable and conventional and exactly what had been planned for her, wrote to Mira in November with a letter that was warm and slightly bewildered, and which contained the line, "I always knew you were clever, Mira, but I confess I did not know it was like this. I suppose no one did. I'm glad they know now." Mira read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to remember. Julian read The Architecture of Marriage in 2 days. He found his character on the 18th page, which was further into the book than he had expected, which told him something about the shape of the story she had decided to tell. He read it with the focused, slightly uncomfortable attention of a man encountering an accurate portrait of himself at his worst. He read the chapter where the character understood what he had done and found himself insufficient, which was the chapter Mira had referred to in the drawing room. He read the ending. He sat in the library of Pembroke House with the book in his hands for a long time. Then he went to find his wife. She was in her sitting room, not writing, reading, with her feet tucked under her in the chair by the window, in the particular configuration that meant she was genuinely absorbed. She looked up when he came in. He held up the book. "The ending," he said. She waited. "The man in the ending," he said. "He is—" He stopped, looked at the book, looked at her. "He is happy." "Yes," she said. "Not because he deserves it." "No," she agreed. "Because she—" He stopped again. "Because she decided," Mira said, "that the person he was becoming was worth staying for, and because he kept becoming it." She looked at him steadily. "Those are two requirements, both of them." He looked at her. "I know. Are you still becoming it?" He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from hers, the chair that had become, in the past 4 months, his chair, the one that meant the conversation was going to be a real one. "Yes," he said. "I am." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she unfolded her feet from under her and settled into the chair properly and picked up her book again. "Good," she said. "I'm on the last chapter. Don't interrupt." He stayed. He read his own book. Outside, London went about its November evening, and inside Pembroke House, 2 people sat in the comfortable, honest quiet of people who have stopped orbiting and started arriving. And it was, finally, truly, without qualification, enough. The third novel was dedicated, without explanation, to Jay. Those who knew, knew. Those who didn't spent 3 seasons speculating. Mira found this mildly entertaining and said nothing publicly, which was, by now, entirely expected of her. She had established a reputation for a particular quality of silence on personal matters that was itself a kind of eloquence, and London had learned that M.H. Gray would tell you everything and nothing simultaneously, and that this was part of what made the work extraordinary. The third novel was different from the first 2, darker in places. It was about grief and the specific way that grief reshapes a person's relationship to joy, and funnier in others, with the precision of comic observation that had been there since the beginning and had only sharpened. It was longer. It was harder to put down. Lord Aldwych said it was the work of a writer who had fully arrived. Mira said she was still arriving. She expected to be for some time. She was still at Lady Devonish's salon every week, where she had been installed, by the comfortable consensus of the other regulars, as a permanent and essential fixture. She had recently begun, at Lady Devonish's suggestion, to invite writers she admired, younger ones, less established, some of them women writing under initials for exactly the reasons she once had, and to give them, in the small protected space of the salon, the specific gift of being taken seriously by people who could take them seriously. She had not forgotten what it had cost her, the years of invisibility. She did not intend to forget. Julian had become, over the course of a year of genuine effort, someone she was glad to know. Not just glad to be married to, glad to know, specifically, the distinction being important. He had the quality, which she had always suspected was there underneath the wager and the cowardice, of someone who improved with accountability. He had also, to her considerable ongoing pleasure, developed into a genuinely useful reader. He read everything she wrote, not in the reflexive, supportive way of a husband who feels obligated, but in the engaged, critical way of someone who was actually thinking about the work. He was wrong about things regularly. She told him so. He conceded when he was wrong and held his position when he wasn't. And the arguments they had about her manuscripts were the best arguments she had ever had. She had put several of them, likely fictionalized, into the third novel. He had noticed. He had said, reading the relevant section, "This is verbatim." She had said, "I have an accurate memory." He had said, "I know, it's terrifying." She had said, "You should have thought of that before you married a writer." He had laughed. She had laughed. It was, she thought, a very good marriage. Not because it had begun well, it had begun as badly as a marriage could begin, but because they had built it, slowly and honestly, and with the specific, unglamorous work of two people who had decided to keep going. On a November evening, exactly 2 years from the wager that had started everything, she sat in the library of Pembroke House with the firelight on the spines of the books and her husband in the chair across from her, and the beginning of a 4th novel in her head. And she thought, I was the plain sister. I was the joke. And here is what became of that. Here is the room I am in. Here is the work I have done. Here is the man across from me, reading, and the fire, and the library, and the life I have made from the thing that was meant to diminish me. Here is what becomes of the joke. The joke becomes the story, and the story, told well enough, becomes everything.